Welcome back to part two of my conversation with Chef Norman Van Aken. In part one, we explored the journey from Illinois to Key West and the experiences that ultimately led to the creation of New World Cuisine. But in this episode, we take the conversation even deeper. We talk about the chefs who helped shape modern American cuisine, the evolution of the industry, mentorship, hospitality, leadership, and the lessons Chef Norman has learned from a lifetime spent in kitchens around the world. So let's get back into the conversation right here on the Incredible Discourse.
Yippee!
Wow. So can you walk me through the process of writing a cookbook? So I know you've obviously written a lot, and I'm sure the experience vary from cookbook to cookbook, but what is the process? Is it similar to how that was? You write down everything that you want to do and then you kind of carry it out, or what's that procedure look
Not
like?
sure you ask 10 cookbook authors or whatever kind of authors, a book on painting, whatever, they're going to give you 10 different ways to answer that thing. But for me, it began with me, the first book, I'm, telling my story, some of like what we talked about in the very first initial questions of this interview, being raised in the Midwest and then coming to Florida kind of story. But the evolution of being primarily before I came up with New World Cuisine, I was cooking a hodgepodge of things that were certainly being affected by Key West, but some of it still holding on to the lessons I'd learned through the European formed kitchens from before. So each book became a different movie, a different project, a different genre, not a different genre because they're all cookbooks, but I was seeking to find another way, another facet at least, if not another way, to turn and go, now I want to learn about this. When I did the book called New World Kitchen, that was a lot to learn because I was basically saying, I'm going to write a book that'll cover 28 countries without having been raised in those countries, without having been to most of the countries. And fortunately, the publisher gave me 3 years to do that book. But I created a dynamic with our restaurant because I wrote that one at the original Norman's, where I essentially created a grid-like list of questions for the staff, because the staff was from all over. Like in Miami, as you know from having worked here, they could be from Venezuela, Nicaragua, New Jersey, California,
Colombia, yep,
Texas,
everywhere.
Colombia, all of that. All right, so where are you from? Where are your parents from? Your grandparents from? What were their favorite dishes? What did they cook in the home? So I developed a matrix of the answers. And then I also, this is another thing I did commonly and do commonly, which is I got a map of those countries, and I made sure that I could pretty much stick a pin in every country to make sure that representationally I was going to cover the topic. And I had an older friend who was quite a mentor to me at that time, Mr. Luis Zalamea, who was Colombian, and a proud writer, an ambassador, a diplomat, a newspaper man, a bon vivant, a boulevardier, a lover of life, such a gas to hang around with. I did write about him in my memoir. And I had been working on the book for over a year, and I asked him for his thoughts on it. Took the manuscript home, came back about 3 days later. He said, well, Norman, you've written a very good book, if you want to call the book on the Caribbean, because you have not really gotten into South America at all. I was a bit crestfallen because I put all this work into it, but he told me the truth. I had
Right.
not deeply gone in there because I really didn't know the topics. Now I had to renew my my mission, and to do that meant a lot more interviewing people. People began to, and I invited them. They began to come into the test. We had a separate kitchen by this time for doing parties, and I was able to use that as a satellite test kitchen. And so grandmothers, aunties would be coming in from, members of families of our staff and cooking a dish and I'd be, making notes side by side and learning the dish from them, and
Wow.
of course paying them for the ingredients because sometimes they wanted to shop where they were used to shopping, and then and then adapting to that whole scenario. So I learned so much from that book, doing that book, that it just enlarged my understanding of what it meant to be able to cook from the Latin Caribbean repertoire, and it also had a huge growth opportunity for me of learning Miami in a way that I hadn't really known Miami yet. People tend to stay in their own neighborhood and their own comfort place, but by doing this book, I have to cover in Argentina. Then I would go to an Argentine restaurant and discover restaurants that I would never had discovered had I not been driven. Now, Mr. Zalamea, shamed me almost into it. Said, "You got to do this right. If you're going to do it, your name's going to be on this thing forever and ever. And you don't want the people from South America to go, you don't know what you're talking about, man."
Right.
So
Right.
it really is a lesson, and a long lesson, and a deep lesson that I was lucky to be able to delve into and then represent, because we did a book tour with that one too.
Wow. That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the era. And so I read a lot in your books and in my research. You in your era where you were coming up, there was a lot of voices like uh, Charlie Trotter. You mentioned a lot, Emeril, Thomas Keller, and it feels like everyone was kind of defining American cuisine from their take, right? How did you
Yeah,
see your role in that conversation while it was happening?
great question. Um, I fully recognize that I am extremely lucky to have been born and come up in an arc of American history where gastronomy, where cuisine was being taken in a way that it hadn't really been taken before, where chefs had the opportunity to become more than nameless, faceless, um, working people that just did stat menus, stat dishes that were expected to by the owners. There became an alive atmosphere. Drew Nieperant, the famous restaurateur of New York, that is partners with Robert De Niro in the Nobu restaurants, but even more, or just as much, he's done his restaurants, Montrachet. He, he got a lot of restaurants. Drew's got a memoir out right now, but Drew was at an event, a Share a Strength event, I think, and there was 30 chefs there. I think it was a Turnberry, but Drew was always fun and crazy. And he said, "We are alive during the Woodstock of American cuisine." And it was a great way of portraying what we were all feeling. A lot of people talk about chefs being competitive and, turning their back and adding an ingredient to a soup kind of thing, which did exist in the 70s more, but it changed a lot. And when I wrote New World Cuisine, you turn that book over and look at the back and the blurbs that the people that wrote and said the kind of things that they said. It was very congenial, very a great fraternity, sorority between the people who were cooking in the United States, and seeing each other in magazines and rooting for each other. It was really great. And so many events happened that where we got to cook with each other. I mean, when I did New World Cuisine, I had the press party at Daniel Boulud's restaurant. And Danielle was expediting my food so that I could talk with the journalists in the dining room while he was
Wow.
expoing my food. It was extremely lucky, and I mean the brotherhood, sisterhood of these chefs to this day lasts. I hope that people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. I hope that they feel the same way as we do about our particular generation. Charlie, those that didn't know Charlie or don't know Charlie, I urge them to see the documentary that was written about, that was filmed and portrayed his life, called Love Charlie, which means the way you sign off a letter or a postcard. It really does a good job, and it's probably free online. Love Charlie. I'm in the documentary, as is Emeril and Wolfgang Puck and others that people will know, and talk about extraordinary contributions to the cuisine of the world, not just America, but the cuisine of the world. Charlie began, his first cooking job was with me in Northern Illinois. Janet and I had returned from Key West to Northern Illinois once Justin was born and Janet was homesick. And mother, she's one of 8 children. And so she decided after 2 years of, Justin being 2, let's go home. Let's, go back and live with the family, near our families, your family's there, my family's there. So we did. And it wasn't too much longer after that I did get a job as the head chef. We didn't call it chef de cuisine at that point, but the head chef of a restaurant in Lake Forest, Illinois. Charlie got a job as a busboy because he hadn't cooked yet. And it wasn't long after that he was doing that he asked me for a job in the kitchen. It's rather humorous because I said flat out, no, why would we hire you? You have no experience. Not recalling my own lack of experience in my first job.
Right.
Yes, but he did fine. He came along pretty quick. And then Charlie introduced me to Emeril. This was a number of years later, but for a period of time, it's like we would, what pre-service is because you're in the industry, but for the guests who don't, it's that half hour or so that each night the chef goes out to the dining room, and the dining room front of the house management comes and everybody prepares for the guests coming in. We tell each other about what our specials are and go over the book and all of that. Well, fax machines were a thing by that point in time. And there was this magical little period of time where Charlie and Emeril and I would send each other the nightly menus by fax machine to each other's restaurants. Wow. And we would read to our staffs what Emeril's doing or what Charlie's doing, and they would conversely do the thing. And I remember doing an event in New York for the Star Chefs group, and there was a presentation, and then after there was a break, and everyone outside, get a breath of fresh air. A lot of the young chefs, I'm sad to say, went out for a smoke, right. Which I hated to see them doing. And these 2 young chefs came over to me and said, "Chef, we work at Morimoto, but we used to work at Emeril's." And Emeril was Emeril would come out and read the specials that you were doing at our pre-service meeting. And I just realized, that was just extraordinary that we shared in the various ways that we wanted to give our vision for American cuisine in our different and respective ways.
That's awesome. So after decades in the kitchen and in dining rooms, with all of your experience, what standards or rules do you believe should never change in the industry, no matter how trends, technology, or media evolves?
Oh my God, what an intense, broad, exciting question that is. I think the oldest lessons are always the same. It's the golden rule. It's do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I don't believe in, the dynamics of a kitchen culture where you belittle one another, where you berate one another. I'm totally lost, when people think that is a magic way to get people to excel. I know people that I've been very close to that they did that, and that was part of their dynamic, but it's never been one of mine. And I think that's something that's inviolable that I don't put up with. We're here to help each other and to do the best job that we can do. I think sometimes people would be surprised to hear a chef say this, but I think that, on a percentage of 100%, I think that service is probably 55%, 45 to food when it comes to people loving a restaurant. I don't think that the nuances between the taste of tarragon and the taste of chervil are going to probably be picked up by that. But I think that the kindness of a host person not going, "Do you have a reservation?" Not doing that.
Right.
Like it's supposed to welcoming them from the very get-go, not questioning them for the very get-go. All those different things are the magic of the hospitality world. Danny Meyer wrote Setting the Table, one of the great books on hospitality. A person that worked with Danny, Will Guidara, wrote Unreasonable Hospitality. Anybody who really wants to understand the philosophy of hospitality could buy both of those books. And dive in because they're excellent books on all of the things that we're talking about right now.
Nice. Yeah, I think I would be inclined to agree with you. I think the hospitality part, no matter which era you're in, is what made the great restaurants great and what continues to make good restaurants great today as well. I can't think of a situation of where I've been to a restaurant where I've had the questions or not the uh, cordial hospitality presented and was like, oh man, we should go back to there. We should dine here constantly. So I want to ask a question about what you said a little bit earlier when you said about the berating and of the cooks and us all being together to work together to help each other.
Mhm.
How how have your ideas about leadership and mentorship changed? And what do you believe kitchens owe the people who come up through them?
What I believe that what repeat that last part, Mark?
And what do you believe kitchens owe the people that are like training and coming up in these kitchens?
Oh. I think the central difference between the opportunity we give people who come up in our kitchens and would come up in other kitchens as well is the educational opportunity to instill in them a never-ending thirst for knowledge. I can't compete with, let's say, hotels that are doing, what are sometimes disparagingly called the rubber chicken banquets, where they make a lot of money
Right.
off of that kind of revenue stream. But what I can compete with that a lot of restaurants or hotels can't compete with is the opportunity for our chefs to go from being perhaps a prep person to a line person to the sous chef, eventually become a chef in their own right. The people who worked with me at the original Normans there were, let's say, 9 of them, all of them line cooks working for me. Within a year or two, they'd all become sous chef or chef of another property
Wow.
after having served time, sometimes for 4 or 10 years with me. But they all went from, working there to getting the opportunity for financial growth. That is, part of the, a proven track record of having worked at Norman's.
And you have staff in your Norman's location in Orlando right now.
Mhm.
Do you have a lot of people that have that aspiration to become a chef?
Very much so. I mean, when I interview a person, whether it's today or it's 15, 20 years ago, I'll ask them, what do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? And if they say working the grill, I'm like, that's it.
Right.
That's that's the beginning and the end because you're going to start on the grill or you're going to start a garde manger or something like that. I want to hear the answer. I want to have my own place.
Right. And
Uh,
when you're on site, are you doing a lot of teaching or are you doing a lot of the other jobs? Are you cooking on the line? What is your role when you're in-house? And how often are you in-house?
well, that's a always transitioning situation. For many years, Norman's was in Coral Gables. And then we did some satellite restaurants that one was in Key Largo, not the two were in Coral Gables at the same time. So Miami was basically my hub for a very, very long time. I mean, I was still working the line when I was 48 years old, at Norman's. I had a station. Fortunately, my station was perched out in the dining room. It was a big 2 pizza ovens next to each other, hearth, beautiful hearths,
Oh
wood
wow.
burning, old school, built by Roman artisans before we ever got the restaurant. It was off the beaten track, and as Cindy knows, and uh, and yeah. So, but then the Ritz Carlton came calling to say, "Would you do a Norman's in Orlando with us?" And so that became the first time we did one with the Norman's name outside of where we lived. Norman's was in the Ritz Carlton for 16 years. The Ritz was sold, and the new owners decided that your lease was actually 15 years. We gave you an extra year because we didn't know what to do, but now we don't want to leave that restaurant to somebody else to make all the money, so we're going to operate it ourselves. See you later. So that meant either finding or not finding another location, we decided that we built up goodwill. We had a good track record. And so we decided to open up Norman's in Orlando in a freestanding location, which is where we are right now.
Nice.
Still don't live in Orlando. So that means going up there every month and spending 3 or 4 days of intense interaction with the team. And of course, doing public relations and events with or visiting with guests who, at this point in my career, it's really sweet. They want to get a picture taken. They want they want a menu signed. They want a book signed.
I can
That
relate.
is, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. No, I'm not working the stations anymore. I much as I'd love to. My fantasy still is to have some little station like I had at the original Normans, where I could, set up a little Iwatani burner if necessarily, and cook dishes from 7 to 9 or something, just
Right.
because I still love it. Uh, and I'd love to cook dishes that my team hadn't seen before, out of my never ending thirst for making new things, because they learn very well on their own, but they also learn very well when I show them something.
And that was what I was going to ask you. When you're in and you're in the kitchen, is everyone like a sponge? They fighting for your attention, or are you going over and giving that one-on-one to each person and giving a tip or a pointer or a congratulations, or how does that look like when you're in the kitchen?
Mark, I'm really touched by their humility. My crew is really almost all immigrant or children of immigrant people. Some had been to, a cooking school, but many of them have learned by working. Sometimes they began in a Burger King and then they got a job in a hotel in Orlando, Disney, Universal. They learned from going up the ladder step by step in the world of learning to cook in a similar way as me, which is to learn on the job, OTJ,
Mm-hmm.
um, not so much book learning like me, because a lot of people have the other tools, the YouTube tools or the
Right.
TikTok tools. Not that I'm a huge advocate for those tools, because I think that you have to be considering the source of what is that. It's not Jacques Pepin that's probably showing you how to make an omelet
Right.
there. But I think they're a little bit timid about it. And I'm like, but I always come to the there's a cook's pre-service meeting at 3 o'clock, or chef's pre-service meeting at 3 o'clock, which we are able to hold in a private dining room that seats just about all of us. And then we'll talk about where they are with not only the menu tonight or the parties that are coming in, but also talk about just the overall. I ask them, the kind of questions like, where do you see yourself being in 5 years, and all that. And then almost invariably, I'll go back into the kitchen, go to station, taste some things with each of them, talk to them. I'm being there, 4 times in a month. I feel like I owe it to them to give myself that time, to give them my time. And then when it comes into service, I'm always like, to my management team, let me know anybody that wants to meet me. If they want to, talk, I'm there to do that. I'm not here just to, hide in the corner and have dinner.
Right. Right. Oh, that's awesome, Chef. The mentor aspect of the entire thing. I love that. And I think I got that from reading about you and reading through your books. And I really think that's an awesome thing for you to pass down the information that you have, because you have so much of it and so much practical experience over many eras. So like just having this interview, we're talking about different eras: the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. And for me, I was born in 86. I didn't start cooking until 2007. So I could take so much from just the experience that you've had before I was even on the planet. And that to me is extremely rich, because I am super interested in like the eras of cooking, and you can see how it changed from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s to today, right? It's way different now than it was then, but you can see that evolution, that it's grown so much.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like both ways at once. When I think about the great chefs who really captured my imagination, incited my imagination, uh, when I was first buying the books, there's a book, and I look up here because there's a bookshelf right here. One of the great books that inspired me so much is titled "The Great Chefs of France," and it's written by uh, Anthony Blake and photographed by Quentin Crew. I lived inside the pages of this book. It was before there was internet. It was before there was, the Instagram, Pinterest, of all the ways to look into kitchens that didn't exist before. In this particular book, there was rich with photography, and of the restaurants, I think there's 21 restaurants. They did the three-star restaurants, Michelin, of France at that time, which was around 79 when that book came out. But the reason I'm bringing it up right now is that part that doesn't change, can't change, should never change, is that those chefs that are featured in the book, their reverence for raw product, fish, herbs, spices, all of that is just bottom line. They would kill themselves to get at whatever they could get at to make their cuisine just become illuminated with the power of Mother Nature.
Wow.
So people can see the rise, the ebb, and the fall of, let's say, I don't know, I don't want to, say foams, but that became like a huge thing for a while, and especially in the 90s. But it's just a technique,
Right.
Things are always changing from a technique standpoint, but they're never able, and never should they be able, to change from the the ultimate glory, which is Mother Nature, and what we need to do to preserve our planet and take care of our, as Buckminster Fuller put it, our spaceship Earth.
Right.
It's a miracle that we're here in this universe, in this galaxy, and taking things for granted, like, global warming is just like insane. You're
Yeah.
talking about the very place that we live, and our children and our grandchildren live now. So there are things that change and some things that can't change, some things that should never change. Hospitality, kindness, education, genuine, being committed, having that passion, never feeling like you always know it all. I mean, you never can, never will. It's ever going to flip out of your way and go somewhere else. I love that.
Yeah. Yep. And so when you mentioned the tools of today, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Instagrams, right?
Right.
So when you look at young cooks today and the way that food is shared and consumed now, what gives you hope, and where do you worry we're losing something important?
The sincerity in the industry is still there. I mean, especially when I think about COVID and the near annihilation of the business models that happened to the people who are cooking, out of their own restaurants, people who were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, their world getting shut down by COVID, and the isolation of COVID, and having to reinvent themselves and doing it, and having to put their beautiful food in a box so it could be put into an Uber, or some other conveyance, and still having to be so adaptive at a time of such a scary time, people dying, and it gives me hope that they didn't give up, and they stayed in the fight. Now, of course, a lot of people did leave the industry. We know that. But a lot of people, they have adapted to the technology to where I can be with my team through Zoom technology, just like we're here together today, even though we're many miles apart. We've learned as humans to adapt to this technology in ways that we can continue the education, even though we're not in the same place. And so that gives me hope. But the fight has never been greater. The politics of America have never been worse. I can't throw up my hands, even though I could say, well, how many more years am I going to be alive? 10, 22? Who knows the answer to
Right.
that? No one. But I do have Audrey Quinn Van Aken, who's 13 years old now, and I have to remain in the fight on behalf of her and the other children and grandchildren who deserve the kind of life that we want for them.
Yeah. That's a great answer, Chef. Okay, my last question, and then I want you to talk about your nonprofit.
Okay.
So the whole season, this season, season 2, is about the art and the mindset of the modern chef. What is your idea of the mindset chefs should have in today's kitchen, and how does that compare to the mindset in different eras?
I think that one of the great wake up calls that has happened in the recent past and continues is the cancel culture, the uh, the the put down culture, the the infighting that existed, the belief that there was always another cook that could come around, another waiter that could come around. There was an endless supply of people that can easily replace whoever you have. Turns out when you lose 30% of the workforce, that no longer is the case. There has to be and has been a reckoning here. I don't think it's been total, but there has to be a reckoning in the sense of you've got to um, commit to building the culture in your restaurant that is sustainable. Sustainable as a business, of course, or you won't have a restaurant. But one of the best ways to make it sustainable is to make sure that you don't have the turnover that kills restaurants. Don't take it for granted that you'll always be able to find somebody who's just as good. I'm not saying you should be in fear, but I'm saying that you need to elevate people from within, find the means that you're going to garner their allegiance and appreciation. And to do that, that means to speak to their better angels.
And how does that compare to the mindset of years ago?
Oh, um, I think the mindset of years ago was built on the idea. I mean, if you go back to, let's say, the 40s, it wasn't that way. I mean, in that great French Chefs of France book, there were people in that book that were old enough to have lived during World War II and working in France. And one chef recounting how he hid the butter in his safe when the Germans came in to sniff out and see whether or not they were hiding any Jews in his restaurant.
Wow.
So the vicissitudes of history are important to not just think about the last 30 years, but think about time for longer arcs
Right.
than that. But I think there was a period of time in the 80s and 90s. Again, it wasn't across the board where people were, living in a bubble of disillusion about how it was always going to be easy to find anybody else to do that job, and hanging out, partying so hard that it was just insane. I mean, just crazy. I mean, I lived in a party town. I lived in Key West, and
Right.
in some ways, I think that was good because I could see that as William Blake put it, the palace of wisdom is found on the road of excess. When you see people dying because of their partying so hard, it's a wake up call, and I didn't want to be a part of that.
Right.
So I think that we're at a time in the culture where the opportunity, if we can stay in the business and stay sustainable and manage it hard, price of eggs, price of beef, getting the customers to think that you're not ripping them off if you're charging more money for things that cost you more money.
Right.
It's an unfortunate fact that the clientele, if they spent 6 months working in a restaurant, they'd have a greater appreciation for what it means to operate a restaurant.
Yep. I believe that. I believe that. That's a great answer. And I think that I think that's a subject that I haven't quite touched on in the solo episodes that are releasing here soon. Because just for context, this interview is happening 3 days before the first episode of season 2 is coming out. And so one of the things that or the whole basis of the first episode is the modern chef's mindset and what it takes to go into the kitchen and have the passion and the willingness to put in the time and the effort and evolve. One thing I did not touch on was what you said, which is I'm very grateful that you gave that answer because it is a different idea, a different mindset, because people are not as replaceable as they once were, if they ever were. And I think you're right about COVID being the kind of, that was the lesson. We lost our staff at the restaurant, and when it was time to hire everybody back, there was a great deal of people who said, I'm done with this. I don't want to do the restaurant anymore. I can do something remote, or I've learned something different through my time that I've had. And so the hours were extremely long. I remember, I feel like I was there constantly, from open to close, doing as many things as I can because I just could not bring back the amount of staff.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I'm quite fortunate that Janet and I met in the hospitality business. She was the young waitress, I was a young cook. And fortunately, she understood from having lived it herself what it meant to be married to a person who worked weekends and worked holidays.
Yeah.
Because she was working many of them until she was a young mother and needed to take care of baby.
Right.
We didn't have, our families were up north, so we didn't have the multi-generational situation that might have changed things. But my mom did come to live with us often during Justin's early years in the winter. Of course, she got out of the snowbanks of Illinois, and she did come, and thank God, because she had such an effect on his life as well.
Yeah. Speaking of Justin, so when I first met him at Bay, and I found out that you were his dad, which I told you that story was it was a funny story. We were swapping numbers because he was often the closing manager, and I was, I had a rotating schedule. So I told him, if you need anything from me or something's happening, just contact me directly instead of putting it through the group chats and everything else. If you need anything, just let me know. And so he gave me his first name, and I gave him my number. He asked me for my last name. He gave me his number. I asked him for his last name, and he said Van Aken. And with like a half crooked smile, I said, any relation to Norman? He said, yeah, that's my dad. And without stopping or anything, just kept polishing the bottles. And I was blown away in the moment. And so I had often told him this story, that I have this book. I don't know if you remember this book.
Who wrote it?
It is written by, well, the Miami Children's Hospital Foundation is the stamp that's on it right now.
Oh.
But it has probably about 150 chefs in there. Cindy's in there. Michelle Bernstein's in there. You're also in there. And so the recipe that you have in this book that you listed was sea bass ceviche. And that one is you, man.
That's the ovens I was talking to you about that are right behind me, the wood burning ovens.
That's awesome.
I was wondering what that book was next to the Key West Kitchen book, because I couldn't make out the title, but yeah, Justin was loath to feel as if he was going to be given some advanced opportunity because of me, because of the Van Aken name. He wanted to be judged on his own merits, and I applaud that. There were times though when I'd be like, I'm not walking on water here. I'm just a chef, just doesn't, you just do you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you know, but he just got his degree from Miami-Dade College. So
that's awesome. You told me that he's considering to start teaching in the culinary department there.
Yes, that's right.
That's phenomenal.
We'll see. I think it's going to happen. And it's so cute, so beautiful. He'll be teaching a class on American regional cuisine.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
hoping I'm hoping I can have the two of you on the show.
Oh, we'd love
Maybe
it.
yeah, maybe in the summertime.
Yeah,
So tell me a little bit about your nonprofit.
absolutely. It's been, I think, going on 4 years now since I first met a woman named Stacy Archer. Stacy began. Been involved in the restaurant business in the world of public relations, where she worked for some big chain like companies in PR, doing PR. Uh, she's not a chef and never has presented herself as a chef. But during COVID, out of her home, she began to do cooking classes for folks who wanted to put dinner on the table for less money. She was a single working mother and in financially tough times, 3 children. She uh, she got to know an executive for the Camilla's House, which is the biggest homeless center in Miami. She began to include classes for people who were homeless, and she got a broader vision, which is to somehow create a nonprofit that would expand the opportunities for people in distress, financial distress. A gentleman who was a great customer of Norman's over the years, who was the CEO of Carnival Cruise Lines and probably the biggest wine collector I've known in Miami, Bob Dickinson. He said, Stacy, you should get to know Norman Van Aken. I think he could enlarge your circle of opportunity by the chefs that he knows in the city. She and I had had a lunch meeting at a restaurant in Coral Gables, and I just loved her philanthropic kindness, her nature for that. Things began pretty much like Bob suggested, which was I began to curate the chef's list for Miami. We began in Miami with not the nonprofit organization title is getcooking.org, www.getcooking.org for those that would like to look it up. Life changes. She moved back to Orlando where her children had been going to school. And with that, we thought, well, that was the end of that. Even though we did with FIU the first year we did here in Miami, but she was able to pretty much transition everything over with another school in Orlando, Valencia College. And Valencia, in addition to having a cooking program, has a film program. So it is quite uh, the Ritz Carlton going to that facility to do the first cooking classes. I mean, I've done Good Morning America and that thing, and there was more camera people there at that college than there was in Good Morning America
That's awesome.
because they were students. At first I was like, why are there all these people here? But I didn't know they were looking to get their degrees. So anyway, what we do is we get money, hopefully donated. It's always a search for the money for corporate dollars. We have got some great sponsors that have helped us. I won't go into that right now because I don't want to forget any of them. But without that, you, as a nonprofit, you don't exist. You don't have the oxygen to exist. I don't get paid. She doesn't get paid. I mean, we don't. We're still in the nonprofit part ourselves.
Right.
But essentially, what I do is I try to identify the most respected chefs in the region, and I've done that now for the last 2 years in Orlando. And each one of them commits to doing a single class per year, 12 chefs, 12 months. They come to Valencia College and they teach a recipe that can be effected at home for $20 or less to feed a family of four in a nutritious
Wow.
way, with the ideal that not only will they be able to make that dish and have it be delicious and tasty, but they will take that class with their kids, so that we're trying to reach multiple generations and have the opportunity to, because I learned so much from being around my mother and my grandmother, but we're losing that in America. We don't have the generational impact of people learning to cook in homes. People are, they're on their phone while they're having their meal. They're ordering in from, to takeout places, and somebody's having, stir fry and somebody's having sliders. I mean, it just isn't the same as it was when I was growing up. So we've now gone from, we started with about 40 families, and now we're up to closing on 100 families. The families get a meal kit. So they're cooking with exactly the same ingredients as the chef is. The chef designs a recipe. I go over the recipe with Stacy, make sure that it's not going to be something that would make the families feel like this is too strange, no, just and the chefs get it. They understood much faster than I think Stacy thought they might. I think she's a little worried that'd be too fancy. But the chefs almost always, they think about their family meals and their backgrounds and their ancestry, and they bring that to the table. So that is what we do. There is a wonderful farm called Four Roots Farm where the meal kits are assembled by the team there. They do it for cost, and then the meals go to the families. And sometimes there's a school where the families might go to that school at the same time. So it's not like a single way of doing it. We have to be adaptive in that way too. And we just had a meeting this morning on how we can expand our social media imprint for 2026 and reach more families.
That's awesome, man. That's great. I admire you a lot, Chef, with the amount of experience that you have and that ever going drive to give back and teach and mentor. It's like something that when I think about you, it's like one of the first things that comes to mind. You're always trying to give back, and I absolutely love it.
Thank you. I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate to have been able to do a job that isn't a job. It's, I found a passion in cuisine, and it found me, and we are made for each other.
So before we wrap up, Chef, where can my listeners find you?
Wow. I wish I knew better how to do what your newsletter did the other day, which is to show them more specifically. I had a link and link and link. I do have in my Instagram and such link in bio. So if they know how to go to link in bio, they're going to be able to go to one of my favorite places to communicate with people now is Substack.
Okay.
Which is like Instagram, but for writers. Not that you can't do pictures, you can, and even videos, but my energies towards publishing with Substack means I can publish without necessarily having to go to wait 2 years to a book to get published. But I can publish a recipe if I want to do a recipe. I can publish one every day. I can publish one 3 times a day. So Substack, but of course Instagram and Facebook, and I do have a YouTube channel as well, which is my name, and it says Norman Van Aken 100. That is the address. Sorry about that ringing phone. I don't even know where the phone is. Okay.
So YouTube, Norman Van Aken 100. And what's how can they find you on Substack?
That's Norman Van Aken with a number 1 after it.
Oh, perfect. All right, Chef. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I will catch up with you, and I will add all of our information into all of our show notes so that everybody can find you and look up the nonprofit and look you up and kind of continue on with our conversation through your literature and your restaurants and your nonprofit.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm very impressed with how you're doing with this all. Congratulations on season 2, and I'll talk to you again before long.
Well, that wraps up my conversation with Chef Norman Van Aken. Over the course of these 2 parts, we explored not only the career of one of the most influential chefs in modern American cuisine, but also the philosophy, curiosity, mentorship, and passion that has defined his life's work. Chef Norman's story is a reminder that great chefs aren't built overnight. They're shaped by experience, by failure, by mentorship, by relentless curiosity, and by a willingness to learn long after they've achieved success. So, thank you, Chef Norman, for your time, for your stories, and your generosity in sharing all of them with us. And to all of you listening, thank you for spending part of your day with us. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who loves food, who loves hospitality, and who loves the stories behind the people who shape our industry. Next week, we'll be back with a brand new episode titled The Chef Within. We're talking about leadership, burnout, and legacy. So until then, keep learning, keep cooking, and keep pushing yourself to be the best every single day. Thank you guys for listening today. And I'm Mark Grigsby, and I'll see you next time right here on The Incredible Discourse.